Upset wins are the best wins. As fans, we pay for the drama, and upsets give us the absolute most of that. At the end of 2018, Tennis Channel made a list of the biggest upsets in tennis history. We had analysts, historians, and former players create that list. But we also let the public re-rank those choices. There are a lot of reasons why we might disagree on which matches to include and in what order to rank them. At the end of the day, it comes down to how you define an upset. And with so much opinion involved, we want to create a way of ranking matches without the emotion. With the 2020 season winding down, we'll specifically look back at the history in New York. So we're setting out to mathematically prove the biggest upset in US Open history. This is Replay, a series where we look at the way numbers have shaped the game we love. First things first, we have to define which matches we're actually looking at. One of the core factors in an upset is the difference in ranking between the two players. So we need to be able to comfortably assume that the players' contemporary rankings are scientifically proven. The WTA has used a modern points-based ranking system since 1975. However, from 1973 through 1989, men's tennis rankings were determined by averaging their results from the last 52 weeks. But this had loopholes. The ATP itself recognized that this method, 1, allowed players to increase their rank by just waiting for the worst results to expire, thus raising their average, and 2, discouraged players from competing at smaller tournaments because even the maximum points at, say, an ATP 250 or 500 could make their average drop. The ATP didn't adopt what is called the best of ranking system until 1990. All this goes to say that we'll only be using US Open results starting in 1990. That way, both tours are using a similar system to rank their players based on data. Now that we've defined the range of matches to look at, we have to actually define an upset. We've identified 11 criteria to score these matches: ranking, seeding, prior head-to-head record, tournament round, sets played, experience, career success, record on surface, record at tournament, age, and je ne sais quoi. If you want to know exactly how every field is calculated, a full explanation is in the description of this video, but a quick summary. Ranking, seeding, career success, record on surface, and record at tournament help make up each player's score. The idea is the better a player has been historically and the higher their rank and seeding for the tournament, the higher their score. We then subtract the winning player's player score from the loser's. That way, the better the losing player should have been, the higher the number goes. Prior head-to-head, tournament round, sets played, and je ne sais quoi make up the match score to tell us how good the actual play was. Now, across the board, we're sticking with the guideline that more drama equals a bigger upset. So longer matches and later rounds boost these scores. And, for those of you who are wondering, je ne sais quoi is just a little extra wiggle room for circumstances that the other criteria don't quite take into account. Now, we multiply the difference in player scores by the matchup score to ultimately give us our upset score. But there's actually one more piece in the middle of this, and that's age. While older players like Federer, Serena, and Venus are seeming to defy age, and young players like Bianca Andreescu have broken onto the scene earlier than expected, that isn't normal. I want to take into account that while a player may on paper be incredibly good, age can mess that up. So we decided to pull the records on every player who has ever won a match at the US Open, from 1990 to 2020. And honestly, it's fascinating. For reference, 64 players win at least one match, but they collectively play 127 matches. So 127 divided by 64 comes out to 1.98. That's the average number of matches won per player who wins at least one match. Now here's that line on the graph, so you can see who is above and below it. Some of these numbers are crazy, and to be fair, it comes down to what statisticians call sample size. If you have a smaller number of people in a group, an outlier can distort the data much more easily. Look at the numbers for WTA players in their age 37 tournament. Now, according to this data, 37-year-olds perform 177% better than the average player, but that doesn't really make sense. If you look a little closer though, there are only 2 players who, from 1990 to 2019, won a match at the US Open at the age of 37. Can you guess who they are? In 2017, Venus Williams made the semifinal, winning 5 matches on her way. Then, just last year, in 2019, Serena Williams made the final, winning 6 to get there. In the grand scheme of things, these two performances are only 0.1% of the total data looked at, so it's not really fair to allow them to set the bar for future age 37 performances. Across the board, I've decided that if the number of players for an age group is below 1% of the total number looked at, so if it's under 20 players, we'll throw the data out. Now, that narrows our range of usable data a bit and makes the graph look a little more manageable. Next, we divided each age's average number of wins by that 1.98 number to show how far off they were in either direction. Now, this shows us how more or less successful each age group was as a percentage. Multiply this number by each player's score before combining them to give us our final formula. Once again, you can see the full explanation of the formula in the description of this video. The only thing left to do is apply it. Because there were 7,874 matches played at the US Open over the 31 years from 1990 to 2020, we're going to cut down the ones that we actually calculate a score for. Most matches either aren't an upset or aren't significant enough to warrant consideration for the top of our list, so we're fine to do this. We looked at all of the draws and consulted our writers at Tennis.com and came up with a list of 56 matches to score. Let's go. These are the top upsets in both the WTA and ATP, but there's a few reasons we may want to change these lists around. First, there's a reason Roger Federer is considered the greatest of all time. By last year, his player score was so high that any time he lost, it could be deemed an upset. Even after adjusting for age, which should, in theory, normalize his score as he gets closer and closer to 40 years old. All of the top 5 upsets were against Federer. For variety, we're going to condense every match where Federer loses and honor them all under his loss to Dimitrov last year as the number 1 upset. In the WTA, the formula was actually gamed in a different way. We all remember Kim Clijsters' meteoric return to the tour in 2009 after 2 years of retirement. But what I forgot about was that when she won the US Open that year, in just her 3rd tournament back, she was technically unranked, because the WTA rules dictate that a player has to have played in at least 3 tournaments for their ranking to become official. Now, we had a contingency plan for this in our formula. Since the WTA tracks over 1,200 players in its rankings, we decided that any unranked player would automatically be given a stand-in rank of 1,000. However, we didn't quite have this scenario in mind when we made that rule. Before her return in 2009, Clijsters had already won the US Open, made the finals of the Australian Open and Roland Garros, won the year-end finals twice. I mean, the list goes on. So when she won the 2009 US Open, beating Serena Williams and Caroline Wozniacki in the semis and finals respectively, her score rocketed to the top of the list. We still want to acknowledge those matches as classics and genuine upsets, since Clijsters hadn't played on the pro level in 2 full years, but we're going to set them aside as special commendations, not actually having them on our list. So now, our final list of the biggest upsets in US Open history. We're only going through the top 3 here, but you can find the full list at Tennis.com. At number 3 in the ATP, with 78,383 points, Lucas Pouille defeats Rafael Nadal in 2016. This one made it all the way to a 5th set tiebreak, so Nadal almost changed his luck around, but Pouille held on to become one of the 3 French players to make the quarterfinals that year. At number 3 for the WTA, with 166,943 points, Bianca Andreescu defeats Serena Williams in the 2019 finals. Another heartbreaker for Serena, there are 2 main factors that make this a bigger upset than the 2018 final against Osaka. Andreescu had a significantly shorter track record, including the fact that this was her first US Open main draw, so her player score is lower than Osaka's was. And Andreescu and Serena's historical head-to-head was actually tied, while Osaka had beaten Serena the only time they had played before. Now, I'll admit that this match was my guess for the number 1 spot, so it'll be very exciting to see what actually made it there. For the ATP's second biggest upset, at 78,740 points, we're going back to a match from a different era, when Arnaud Clément defeated Andre Agassi in 2000. Agassi was the defending champion, the number 1 seed, and had just won the Australian Open, but he fell to Clément in the 2nd round. And for the runner-up set in the WTA, 181,706 points, Roberta Vinci defeats Serena Williams in the semifinals of the 2015 US Open. In an informal poll of my coworkers at Tennis Channel, most people thought this would take the top spot, and it's close, as you'll see. Serena was in her second prime, aiming to finally get a calendar slam. She had dominated Vinci in their previous matches, and Vinci didn't really have a track record to fall back on. The match itself scored a 275 out of a possible 300, the highest score of any match in the WTA. And finally, you already know the #1 match in the ATP, where Roger Federer lost to Grigor Dimitrov just last year. That match scored a massive 179,029 points, which actually is less than either of the top 2 WTA matches. Roger's history is well known by now. He had long dominated hard courts, winning the US Open 5 times and the Australian Open 6 times, and he won his 100th career title in 2019. His player score was an incredible 802. Meanwhile, Grigor had been struggling in 2019 up until this point. At 78th in the world, he would become the lowest-ranked semifinalist at the US Open since Jimmy Connors in 1991. His player score was just 85. Their match scored a 250 out of 300. And now finally, the biggest upset of them all, the WTA's #1. This match just barely beat #2 by about 1,100 points, coming in at a grand total of 182,826. CC Bellis defeats Dominika Cibulkova in the first round of the 2014 US Open. What's crazy about this match is that the matchup score itself was only 110 out of 300. In fact, across the board, this match shouldn't have mattered that much. Sure, a wildcard beat the 12th seed, but it was the first round. Cibulkova's greatest career success was having made the finals of the Australian Open earlier this year, and otherwise had never even won a title on tour. What makes this match so special is how out of nowhere CC Bellis came. Bellis wasn't even considered professional yet. This was her first appearance ever at the US Open, and this is the biggest kicker. She was ranked 1,208th in the world. We set Clijsters' US Open win aside because, even though she was technically unranked, her track record showed that she was a top-tier player. But Bellis was the real deal. At 15, she was the youngest American to win a match at the US Open since 1986. This would start her meteoric rise in tennis over the next few years before injuries sidelined her from 2018 until now. In 2020, she once again entered the US Open as a wildcard. Looking over these final lists, I had a realization. We tend to think of upsets as moments when these massive players lose, when they seemingly shouldn't have. And those matches absolutely make for captivating television and great debate. But we shouldn't forget about the underdogs, just like CC Bellis. They come out of nowhere to amaze us.